people are challenged with the cost of living. We know prices are going up. We know grocery bills, rent, and gas prices are squeezing them in so many different ways. The previous Conservative government cut nearly $1 billion from law enforcement agencies. This is not our vision for safer community. It is no longer legal to buy, sell, or use assault weapons in Canada.
My question is to your last comment, Prime Minister, is we have a lot of well-needed spending during COVID and now. Eventually, your government's plan to balance the books and how we eventually see a balanced plan.
Was the best way to bring our economy roaring back as quickly as possible after the pandemic. And that's exactly what happened. Our economy came back faster and stronger.
ਅੱਜ ਸਰੀ ਸਿਵਕ ਪਲਾਜ਼ਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਰੀ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ 'ਚ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਹੋਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਉਸ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਸੁਣਨ ਨੂੰ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਨਵਾਂ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਊਗਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਆਈਲੀਨ ਮੋਹਨ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਦਾ ਸਨ ਗਨ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਲੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਮਾਰਕੋ ਮਰਚੀਨੋ ਵੀ ਆਏ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਕੀ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ।
It's great to be here with you, with Marco, Taleb, Suk, Parm, Wilson. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional, unceded and shared territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Katsi, Kwantlen and Semiahmoo First Nations. I also want to take a moment to congratulate David Eby on becoming the leader of the BC New Democratic Party and the next Premier of British Columbia. I look forward to working with him to make life more affordable, build a better future for everyone in the province. I'm looking forward to continuing the great work that I've been able to do with Premier Horgan over the past years. John has been a solid friend and an extraordinary leader through uncertain times here in BC. But I can tell you that his impact, his influence, and his leadership has stretched right across the country. John will be sorely missed, as I wish him all the best in his next challenges. But I know that we'll be very much looking forward to working with David as the months and years unfold in the future. It is great to be back home in BC. I got to spend some time with Canadians yesterday, people in British Columbia yesterday, including a number of women's groups, to talk about how people are challenged with the cost of living. We know prices are going up. We know grocery bills, rent, and gas prices are squeezing them in so many different ways, which is why we've stepped up as a government with targeted support that's going to help millions upon millions of Canadians. It's great news that this week we passed the GST credit. That means we're doubling the credit for 6 months in checks that are going to be arriving in the coming weeks to 11 million households across this country. It'll make a real difference in the rising cost of living for so many Canadians. We're also busy moving forward in the House of Commons with legislation that's going to make dental care accessible for all kids under 12, with up to $1,300 in support over the next 2 years for families who can't afford dental for their young kids. And we're moving forward with direct support for low-income renters. It will hit about 2 million people, almost 2 million people, with a $500 top-up that will really, again, make a difference with the rising cost of living. On sait que les gens font face à des énormes défis au niveau du coût de la vie. C'est pour ça que notre gouvernement est là pour aider avec le coût de la vie, avec un crédit de la TPS qui va arriver dans les semaines à venir dans 11 millions de ménages, avec de l'aide pour les soins dentaires pour les enfants à travers le pays, avec de l'aide pour les locataires à faible revenu. We were pleased the Conservative Party actually supported our measures on GST credits for 11 million households. They changed their initial objection to what we proposed and supported it, which is a good thing. But we now need them to stop blocking the dental and rental supports that we're putting out, because far too many Canadians need extra support, and political parties need to work together to be there for Canadians. We're here today to talk about what we're doing to keep our communities safe. As we see gun violence continue to rise in our cities, and unfortunately Surrey and the Lower Mainland are no exception, we have an obligation to take action in this country. And our ban on imports that took effect in August remains in place. This is one of the strongest actions we've taken on gun violence in a generation. Aujourd'hui, le gel national des armes de poing entre en vigueur. C'est maintenant illégal d'acheter, de vendre ou de transférer une arme de poing au Canada. On gèle le marché pour diminuer le nombre d'armes de poing au pays. C'est une des mesures les plus fortes qui ont été prises pour augmenter le contrôle des armes à feu depuis une génération. Our goal, over time, is to see the amount of handguns in our communities reduced. Let me share with you some statistics to illustrate why this is so important. The number of handguns in Canada has increased by 70% since 2010. Since 2011, firearms-related homicides have gone up nearly 40%, and handguns were the most commonly used weapon. 1 of every 3 girls and women killed by an abuser is murdered with a gun. The presence of a handgun in a home increases the likelihood of self-harm or suicide. Keeping each other safe from gun violence means keeping women, children, and families safe, and it prevents self-harm. That's why we're taking actions today, so that what happened to the loved ones of Eileen and so many others never happens again. Of course, freezing handgun ownership is not the only thing we're doing to prevent gun violence. Before 2015, the previous Conservative government cut nearly $1 billion from law enforcement agencies. But this is not our vision for safer communities. Our Liberal government is reinforcing our borders and giving law enforcement the tools and resources they need to stop illegal gun smuggling. This includes major investments to address gun violence and keep guns out of the hands of gangs and criminals. With this funding, the CBSA can deploy new technology like scanners that can X-ray an entire truck in a matter of minutes. The work we've been doing over the past years is working. Last year, we interdicted nearly twice the amount of illegal guns coming across our border as we had the year before, and we're not stopping that work. On top of that, we're moving forward to increase maximum criminal penalties for gun-related crimes. As of 2 years ago, it is no longer legal to buy, sell, or use assault weapons in Canada, and we're implementing a mandatory buyback. We'll continue working together with provinces, territories, Indigenous communities, and municipalities to build safer communities free from firearm violence. On va continuer d'écouter les conseils des médecins, des experts, des policiers qui voient les conséquences de la violence armée bien trop souvent. Et on va continuer d'être là pour les familles et ceux qui demandent qu'on en fasse plus pour protéger nos communautés. Again, I want to thank the advocates, those who are here today and those out across the country. Thank you for your strength. Thank you for your perseverance. For too many of you, loss and grief is at the heart of what brings you here today. And we are deeply grateful that you continue to stand for a better Canada. We thank you for all those efforts to build a safer future for all our kids, for all our communities. Before I pass it to Marco, I want to highlight that I know you had the opportunity to visit the Burnaby detachment, the RCMP, this morning. Our hearts go out to the family of Constable Shaylin Yang. Of course, that means her family, but also her larger family of RCMP, police and peace officers across the province and across the country who stand with her. We continue to remain pledged to doing everything we can to ensure that our communities are safer, to make sure that people suffering from mental health and those mental health challenges and distress, and those who are on the front lines to help them and serve them are able to get the support and resources they need. Merci tout le monde. Je suis content de passer la parole à Marco Mendicino. Marco.
Merci, Premier Ministre. Bonjour tout le monde, and thank you to Randeep and our entire caucus in Surrey and in the Greater Vancouver area for the stellar leadership that you were showing, not only on public safety but on affordability and a wide range of issues. I want to thank you as well, Eileen, for being here, and I'll come to you in a moment. But before I move to the substance of the announcement, which the Prime Minister, of course, covered, I do want to take a moment to express, on behalf of the Prime Minister and our government, our profound sympathies to Shaylin Yang, the constable who worked in the Burnaby detachment, who sadly lost her life. In speaking with the team that she worked with this morning, I was struck by her dedication and her passion not only to keeping our community safe, but to mental health issues. Prior to becoming a Mountie, she was an advocate, and then was recruited to work on the front lines. And the other thing that I learned from her team this morning was that she was a warrior. And it's quite clear to me from the way in which they imparted the events of that tragic day to me that had she not stood up with bravery and courage, that more lives would have been lost. And so to her father, who I know is here, to her partner, Simone, to all of the family of the policing community here in Burnaby and across the country, our hearts go out to you, and we will continue to do whatever we can. And indeed, this has been a difficult time for the law enforcement community. Yesterday, in my home province of Ontario, I was present at the funeral of the 2 fallen police officers in South Simcoe, to Constables Northrop and Russell. We heard similar stories, in both cases from their colleagues. Constable Northrop had finished his shift that night before he went out into the community, and he took that call voluntarily. And Constable Russell had 33 years on in service, and he could have retired 3 years ago. And this is the uncommon dedication that we see across the country. The women and men who put on the uniform, who put on the badge, who are trying to keep our community safe, who are prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice every day that I'm thinking about today. I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about the families like Eileen. And last time we were here was in the spring, and I remember, Eileen, it was around May 31st, which was Christopher's birthday. And today we're here in and around the anniversary of his death. And even though those are 2 difficult bookends to a life that was tragically cut short by gun violence, it is his memory, it is you that inspires us to do the work that we're doing today. It is all of the advocates, I wish that everybody could see, but they're all here, from municipal leadership to local grassroots organizations like SAFE and Options. I cannot thank you enough. As the Prime Minister said, it is because of your perseverance through that tragedy and through that loss that we are able to do the work that we are doing today, which of course includes the national handgun freeze. And the Prime Minister has outlined the highlights, but just to underline it, going forward today, it will be illegal to buy, sell, transfer, or bequeath handguns. This is a significant stride forward towards a smart, sensible gun policy to keep our communities safe. Why are we taking this decision? Because we've seen gun crime go up. We've seen handgun crime go up. 45 to 55,000 new registrations on average for the last decade, while at the same time seeing handguns overtake and become the #1 type of gun used in homicides. C'est inacceptable. Ça, c'est la raison qu'il faut gérer sur un dossier qui touche tout le monde. N'importe où les Canadiennes et les Canadiens vivent, dans des communautés urbaines comme ici, assurés ou même dans des communautés rurales. I want to say that the step that we are taking today is part of a broader agenda to reduce gun violence. And one of the unique features of our government is we don't believe in just picking one lane when it comes to solving this complex problem. You need smart laws, you need sensible laws, which is why, even as we move forward with this provision today, we're going to work with all parliamentarians to pass Bill C-21 into law. We've got to get that law passed as quickly as possible. It will not only reinforce the national handgun freeze, it will give law enforcement the additional tools that they need to tackle organized crime, hardened criminals who are terrorizing our communities through gun trafficking, whether at our borders or domestically, by raising maximum sentences against those who pose the greatest risk to our communities, by giving police additional surveillance powers to bust up the organized criminal networks that are trafficking guns across borders. We need to pass that law. We need to make sure that we make good on our commitment to implement the buyback program on a national ban for assault-style rifles, because those guns have no place in any community. They were designed for one purpose, and that is to kill people using maximum lethal force in the shortest period of time, and with the partnership of our many, many stakeholders, including provinces and territories. We're going to get that done. And finally, we need to stop gun crime from occurring in the first instance. And I'm so proud of the leadership, Prime Minister, you have shown, our government has shown, in launching the Building Safer Communities Fund, which is a program designed to partner with the people who are in this room, who know where the risks are, who know when young people meet that fork in the road, how we can empower them to have that sense of belonging, of confidence to make the right choices. And we're going to roll out that fund even more quickly than we have in the past. And it's only by doing these three things together that we can truly eradicate gun violence once and for all. And we owe it. We owe it to everybody. We owe it to the victims and families who've been touched, whether you're talking about Portapique and Truro in Nova Scotia, les familles des survivants de la tragédie au Québec, de la Polytechnique ou la mosque à la ville de Québec. In my hometown, the families and the survivors from the Toronto Danforth shooting were right here in British Columbia with Eileen, so that there isn't another tragedy like that again. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I'm getting a little friendly advice, as I always do, from the Prime Minister, and I'm going to introduce Eileen, please.
October 19th marked the 16th anniversary of my son, Christopher, who was stolen from the doorsteps of my home. And during the trial of Christopher, I presented a victim impact statement, and I said, our forefathers should have first invented life before we invented death. And whenever I had an opportunity to do a rally and advocacy in my son's memory, I always said an elected official's first and foremost priority is public safety and security. And never in my lifetime I thought that I would see a day like this that would come about, that we will choose life over death. And this freeze will impact our future society. Choosing life, it takes a political will and a political courage to make it happen. It is not a popular law, freeze. It has not made some people happy, but leaders are not chosen to make people happy. They are there to lead and to act for the future generation. And today, the Liberal government has chosen life over death. And I want to thank the Prime Minister and his partner, leadership of choosing life and not taking into effect of the of the setbacks that this will bring, I think people in the future will bring about and talk about this aspect and this day that we chose life over death for our future generation. And I want to say that a huge thank you to the Prime Minister and to the Liberal government for bringing this legislation forward, that if tomorrow I die, I know that my son's life did not go in, his death did not go in vain. And I am rejoicing that in my lifetime I am seeing this day that we are choosing life over death. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. I want to thank her for her advocacy, Minister Mendocino and the Prime Minister. In the 7 years that we've had government and I've been involved with youth violence and gun violence, I've never seen a very proactive, a very engaged cabinet as those that are behind me. I think the Prime Minister, Minister Mendocino, has come and met stakeholders, victims, advocates, law enforcement on every single time. And every ask that the community has asked, they've delivered on, from bringing a forensic lab, a state-of-the-art lab to help solve crimes, to beefing up security at our borders and our ports, to bringing very tough gun legislation. As I mean, for some people it's not very popular, but I think most Canadians feel that it's the right time to take assault rifles and handguns off. So I really want to thank, on behalf of the members of Parliament from Surrey and Lower Mainland, all the listening and advocacy and then actual results that this government has been doing. So now I think Cecily will take over and take questions. And once again, thank you on behalf of all of us here in Surrey and the Lower Mainland. Cecily.
We'll now have time for questions from reporters, and on a maintenant du temps pour prendre des questions des journalistes, for starting with CB.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions for my colleagues in Ottawa. Firstly, we've heard that the opposition parties, including the Bloc and the NDP, will vote in committee to water down the federal handgun freeze by exempting thousands of recreational shooting club members across the country. Will your government let this happen?
I know how much Quebecers are preoccupied with the rise in gun violence, so it would surprise me if the Bloc were to actually water down these provisions. I know how much progressive Canadians from coast to coast to coast are expecting this government and this Parliament to move forward on strong measures like the ban on assault weapons we brought in 2 years ago, and this freeze on handguns that means it is no longer legal to buy, sell, or transfer handguns anywhere in this country as of today. So it would surprise me greatly for progressive parties like the NDP to stand in the way of strengthening gun legislation and keeping communities safe.
En français.
Je pense que tout le monde sait à quel point les Québécois s'attendent à ce qu'on continue de renforcer le contrôle des armes à feu. Je sais que le Bloc est très conscient de ce que les Québécois demandent. Et je sais que les Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays progressiste veulent avoir plus de contrôle des armes à feu. Alors ça me surprendrait énormément que le NPD choisisse d'affaiblir le contrôle des armes à feu qu'on est en train de proposer. Depuis 2 ans, il est maintenant illégal d'acheter, de vendre ou d'utiliser des armes d'assaut. Et à partir d'aujourd'hui, on ne peut plus acheter, vendre ou transférer des armes de poing. Ça me surprendrait énormément que des partis progressistes essayent d'affaiblir ces mesures-là.
Next question, go ahead.
In the recordings released yesterday between Commissioner Lucky and the Nova Scotia RCMP, the Commissioner confirmed that she was responding to a request from a minister about firearms and stressed that your government was in the middle of trying to get firearms legislation going. What can you say to assure Canadians that this wasn't a sign the government was meddling in a police investigation?
In the days and weeks following the horrific massacre in Port Peak, a killing that left communities reeling, families grieving, and Canadians from coast to coast to coast shocked. Canadians, those families, wanted answers. We wanted to make sure that those families got as many answers as they could as quickly as possible, which is part of why we launched the public inquiry that's going on right now. But every step of the way, we recognized and supported the fact that the RCMP, police of jurisdiction, are the ones who decide what is released and when. They make decisions about how to balance the need of the public to get answers and the need to protect the integrity of investigations. And as we saw in this case, it was the police that months later made that decision to release more information. We will always ask on behalf of Canadians for more answers, but we always ensure that the RCMP and police officers can do their jobs.
Okay, next question, CBC.
En français. Nous savons que dans les jours et les semaines qui ont suivi cette tuerie horrible à Portapique en Nouvelle-Écosse, les familles, la communauté, les Canadiens voulaient des réponses. C'est pour ça que d'ailleurs, nous avons maintenant une enquête publique sur ce qui s'est passé à ce moment-là. Alors oui, nous avions demandé et nous voulions voir toute l'information nécessaire sortir pour donner des réponses aux Canadiens, mais en même temps, nous savions et nous respections toujours le fait que c'est seulement la police qui détermine quelles réponses ils peuvent donner en public et quelles réponses ils ne peuvent pas donner pour ne pas mettre en péril l'intégrité de l'enquête qui est en cours. Et à ce niveau-là, on a toujours respecté cette indépendance et cette autonomie des policiers.
CBC.
Hi there, thanks for taking our questions. The SKS rifle was used by the BC manhunt suspects, the Fredericton shooter, and most recently in the shooting deaths of 2 officers in Innisfil, Ontario, but it's not on the prohibited or buyback list. Why is that, and are there any plans to ban the SKS rifle in Canada?
Happy to turn it over to Minister Mendicino, who can speak to that. Marco?
Well, first, our thoughts go out to those frontline officers who lost their lives during the line of duty as a result of the gun violence that we've seen. And when it comes to the measures that we have already introduced, we put in place a very ambitious plan to ban nationally assault-style rifles and to then, by extension, launch a buyback program to get those assault-style rifles out of our communities once and for all. When we introduced Bill C-21, we said that as a government we would be amenable to working with all parties to make sure that we had the right policies as it relates to assault-style rifles. And that is precisely the work that the Standing Committee on Public Safety is doing right now. So they will be looking at models, they will be looking at exactly the kind of examples that you have said, and providing recommendations to the government, which we have said we will thoughtfully and carefully consider once we receive. But it is important to underscore to you and to your viewers and all Canadians that that work has to be undertaken independently at this stage, that the work of Parliament at the committee stage is undertaken by the membership of those who sit on the committee. In fact, we have one of those members with us today, MP Nur Mohammed, who has been an outstanding advocate when it comes to making sure that we get our gun policies right, including Bill C-21, and I look forward to working with him and all the members of that committee to continue to debate this issue very carefully. Donc, tout d'abord, on avait à introduire une barrière nationale pour des armes d'assaut. Il y a 2 ans maintenant, c'est une mesure très concrète. Et par extension, on va lancer un programme de rachat obligatoire partout pour ramener toute cette arme d'assaut parce qu'il n'y a aucune raison pour permettre ce type d'arme à feu de rester aux communautés. le comité de sécurité publique au Parlement étudie avec beaucoup d'attention la question laquelle touchait sur des autres styles d'armes d'assaut, peut-être qu'on peut bannir ou mettre dans le bannir, mais ce travail est en progrès maintenant au comité dans une façon indépendante et nous restons toujours ouverts pour l'opportunité de travailler avec le comité et même tous les parlementaires. C'est un enjeu très important.
Follow-up?
This is for the Prime Minister. You had reacted to David Eby slated to becoming the BC NDP leader, clearing the way for him to be Premier of BC. Wondering if you just have
But actually, I wanted to follow up on Marco's comments and on your question on the assault weapons ban. As of 2 years ago, it became illegal to buy, sell, or use assault weapons anywhere in this country. And we saw Canadians overwhelmingly supportive of this measure to interdict guns that were designed to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time possible, as easily as possible. That is something that we have done. Unfortunately, we see conservative premiers trying to play the worst kinds of politics in opposition to this measure, which, let's be very clear, assault weapons are illegal to use, to sell, or to buy in Canada now. What the premiers are proposing by objecting to the buyback is to make it simply more difficult for people who currently own those guns that are now illegal to use, to sell, or to buy, to actually be compensated for those guns as we move forward with the buyback. That's the kind of politics that Canadians don't want to see around gun violence, around moving forward on these important measures. Soyons très clairs sur ce que les premiers ministres conservateurs de certaines provinces sont en train de dire par rapport à notre interdiction d'armes d'assaut. Leurs propositions et leurs objections à notre programme de rachat obligatoire ne va que rendre ça plus difficile pour ceux qui sont actuellement propriétaires de ces armes qui sont maintenant bannies, d'être compensés pour ces armes qui sont maintenant illégaux de vendre, d'acheter ou d'utiliser. C'est de la politique pure et simple et nous allons rester focusés sur le travail que nous devons faire pour protéger les Canadiens. Sur le prochain Premier ministre de la Colombie-Britannique, David Eby, laissez-moi juste dire que je suis très content de pouvoir continuer le bon travail qu'on fait avec le gouvernement de la Colombie-Britannique depuis bien des années. J'ai toujours très bien travaillé avec le Premier ministre Horgan, qui est devenu un ami, qui a eu un impact non seulement dans des mesures importantes pour les gens ici en Colombie-Britannique, mais qui a eu un impact positif pour tous les Canadiens dans notre travail ensemble. Et j'ai bien hâte de pouvoir continuer ce travail avec David Eby. Je sais que nous partageons énormément d'atomes crochus, on voit les mêmes défis et les mêmes pistes de solutions. J'ai bien hâte de pouvoir travailler avec lui dans les semaines et surtout les mois et les années à venir.
Next question.
Yeah, switching gears a little bit, Minister Freeland has kind of changed her tone on the economy and warned Canadians that tough times are ahead. That came this week. And Mark Carney also told the Senate committee yesterday that a recession is likely. So I know you've mentioned in this announcement and yesterday some of the cost of living relief measures, but how else, is your government now operating on the assumption that a recession is likely, and what other preparations are you making?
First of all, every conversation I have with Canadians across this country over these past weeks and months has reflected the challenges people are facing with rising costs of groceries, with difficulty around filling their tanks up with gas, concerns about the coming winter, concerns about rising interest rates and the costs on their mortgages. We know Canadians are worried. That is why we're putting forward measures, double the GST tax credit, deliver a check for 11 million households in the coming weeks. That'll make a real difference. And we're also moving forward on support for families kids under 12 who can't afford to send them to the dentist. And we're moving forward on direct support for low-income renters as well. These are measures that we hope that all parliamentarians are going to be able to pass and endorse. Unfortunately, Conservative politicians continue to try and block our support on dental and rental, but Canadians need that support. But let me also be very clear that that support is targeted. We know that we need to help people who need help without putting at risk our fiscal stability or contributing further to inflation. That's why remaining fiscally responsible and measured in our response is essential because we have to prepare for whatever might come in the coming weeks and months. We've made a commitment to be there for Canadians as a government, and we will, with direct, targeted supports for those who need it most, and the ability to respond in case things get worse for families across the country.
Next and last.
Nous savons que les familles à travers le pays en arrachent. Nous savons qu'il y a énormément de défis au niveau de payer l'épicerie, des inquiétudes par rapport au prix de l'énergie, des inquiétudes par rapport à l'hiver qui vient, des inquiétudes par rapport au coût du logement et les taux d'intérêt qui augmentent. C'est pour ça que nous avons mis de l'avant des mesures concrètes pour aider les Canadiens, que ce soit un doublage du crédit de la TPS qui va aider 11 millions de ménages, que ce soit avec de l'aide pour les soins dentaires pour les enfants ou de l'aide pour les locataires à faible revenu. C'est des mesures que nous avançons à la Chambre et on espère que les conservateurs vont arrêter de bloquer les mesures de soins dentaires et les soins pour les locataires et être là pour aider les Canadiens. Mais en même temps qu'on est là avec de l'aide ciblée pour les gens qui en ont besoin, on est aussi en train de se préparer pour les défis qui pourraient s'en venir. On a besoin de rester ciblé, on a besoin de rester responsable à un niveau fiscal et on va continuer de l'aide pour pouvoir appuyer les Canadiens si l'économie se détériore.
Merci. And last and final, next question, and this will be the last.
Welcome to Sri, Prime Minister, and also congratulations, Marco and you, for the bill to ban the haircuts. People standing here, we are in our backyard, that's welcome vision. My question is to your last comment, Prime Minister, is we have a lot of well-needed spending during COVID and now. Eventually, your government's plan to balance the books and how we eventually see a balanced budget.
Thank you, CJ, for your question. I know a lot of families are worried about their household finances and grateful for the help that the federal government had given during the pandemic, and also grateful for the help that we are sending now in a targeted way for those families who need it most. But Canadians are also worried about fiscal responsibility so that we can be sure to have the ability to respond in case the economy deteriorates. Let me be very clear. We went into this pandemic with the best fiscal balance sheet of any country in the G7. And then during the pandemic, we used that to support Canadians, to support families, to support seniors, to support small businesses, to support workers. And the reason we did that was because that was the best way to make sure we got through this pandemic in the best and healthiest way possible. But also because we knew that investing to support Canadians who needed it during these extreme times was the best way to bring our economy roaring back as quickly as possible after the pandemic. And that's exactly what happened. Our economy came back faster and stronger than most other comparable countries. We recovered the jobs we'd lost since February 2002, 6 months earlier than the US did, because we were there to support restaurants, small businesses, workers, families, seniors. So it wasn't just the right thing to do to support Canadians, it was also the smart thing to do and the responsible thing that leaves us on a better fiscal track than many other countries that are still struggling to get their economies going again after COVID. Similarly, through this inflation crisis, we know that targeted support for people who need it the most is exactly how we ensure that Canadians in general, that our economy in general, weathers the coming economic storm, if it arrives, better than most as well. We will be there to support Canadians because we know that the best thing to do to help Canadians is to create an economy that works for all Canadians. That's been our focus since day one. That is how we've been able to lift over 2 million people out of poverty over the past 7 years, even as we've created millions upon millions of new good jobs. That's what Canadians expect. That's what responsible government does. That's what we're going to continue to do. Pendant la pandémie, nous avons été là pour appuyer les Canadiens, pas juste parce que c'était la chose gentille à faire, mais parce que c'était la chose intelligente à faire. Nous avions été là pour appuyer les familles, les aînés, les travailleurs et les petites entreprises. Parce que en faisant ça, on a assuré un retour en force de l'économie plus rapide que bien d'autres de nos pays homologues. Pareillement, avec cette crise de l'inflation, d'aider directement les familles qui en ont le plus besoin, la famille de la classe moyenne et ceux qui travaillent fort pour s'y joindre. Et la meilleure façon de s'assurer que notre économie en général sera plus forte et résiliente à travers ces zones turbulentes qui pourraient venir. C'est pour ça que nous allons toujours être là pour appuyer les Canadiens, pas juste parce que c'est la bonne chose à faire, mais aussi parce que c'est la meilleure chose à faire pour assurer une économie qui travaille pour tous les Canadiens.
Merci, c'est une fin de la conférence de presse. That concludes the press conference.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Hello, Marco. Welcome to Surrey and this new legislation. How you arrived with this decision?
Well, first, it's a historic day and very proud to be announcing here in Surrey the implementation of a national handgun freeze, which means going forward it will be illegal to buy, sell, or transfer handguns, save and except for a few narrow, tailored exemptions. This is part of a broader plan that we are putting in place to eradicate gun violence. It includes making sure that we pass Bill C-21 into law, which will not only reinforce the national handgun freeze, but it will give law enforcement additional tools like raising maximum sentences against hardened criminals who would traffic guns, like introducing red flag, yellow flag provisions to reverse the trend in the connection between domestic violence and the presence of gun, and like giving additional tools to law enforcement to bust up those organized criminal networks that are trafficking guns across the border. We're also giving CBSA more money to hire more people, to get the best technology so that we can stop the illegal smuggling of guns into our country. And finally, we're rolling out a Building Safer Communities Fund to stop gun crime before it starts, and that's something that we're going to continue to pick up pace with.
So that's equally important, Marco, the enforcement of the law. How are the judiciary? Sometimes they get a slap on the hand and they are on the road again and committing these crimes. Can we come up with something, legislation that 3 strikes, you are locked up?
Well, I used to be a federal prosecutor before I got into politics, and so I understand why it's important to send a very clear signal to criminals who would try to terrorize our communities with guns, that if you're going to try to do that, you're going to face a higher risk of going to jail for a longer period of time, which is exactly what is in Bill C-21. But I also want to make sure that we're not just doing that. It's not just about using the criminal law, We have to prevent gun crime from starting in the first place. And so what the Building Safer Communities Fund does is it empowers local organizations to create programs and services to give young people all the tools and the confidence that they need to make the right choices, not going down the path of crime, but instead advancing with their education, advancing to find a career, being positive contributing members. That's how you prevent gun crime. And we owe it to every victim who's ever been impacted and every family that's ever been impacted by gun violence. You saw Eileen Mohan here today. She's standing in solidarity with our government because, as she said, she never dreamed that this day would happen. And here we are. We're doing important things. We're introducing smart, sensible laws. We're investing in our border law enforcement community, and we're preventing gun crime through the Building Safer Communities Fund. Only if you do those three things can you really eradicate gun violence once and for all.
So my last question is, as you mentioned Eileen, and there is a huge gun violence and crime in Surrey. Is any specific programs or funding for Surrey?
Well, we've already partnered with organizations like SAFE and Options. We're going to partner with other local community organizations to give the community additional capacity to, again, create those safe spaces where young people who are most at risk can come and congregate and be confident and make good choices. So there are going to be many of opportunities, I think, to partner with Surrey to really, once and for all, end the scourge of gun violence. And we owe it to the people of Surrey. We owe it to the people of British Columbia. We owe it to all Canadians to continue to do these reforms, because that's how we're going to eventually eradicate gun violence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So Eileen, Prime Minister today announced, banning the handguns. How you feel? You lost your son. How you feel?
I never thought in my lifetime I will see this day. And today, if I drop dead tomorrow, I know that my son's death didn't go in vain, and all my hard work fighting for justice for Christopher did not go in vain, because today we chose life over death. And I always said that, every elected official's first and foremost priority is public safety and security. And today is a wonderful example of what leadership could do. It's not a popular item, but if there's a will, there's a way.
So what else do you think that the governments on the three levels, federal, provincial, local, what else they should do to stop this kind of violence and that environment that more happens in Surrey, relatively speaking?
Well, this was the first step. And the next step is to ensure that more funds are driven towards our land and sea borders, and by air, and also by mail, so that we won't have illegal guns flowing into our country. It has taken 16 years to come to this level, and it might take another 16 years to ensure that our borders and our sea borders and our air is strengthened much more, so illegal guns does not flow through. But it's always happy to have the first step.
Thank you very much. Thank you for time. Ms. Taliwal, ਅੱਜ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਐਂਡ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਮਾਰਕ ਮੈਜੀਨੋ ਆ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਬੈਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਕੀ ਖਿਆਲ ਹੈ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਪੈਸ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਇਹ ਟਾਪ ਪ੍ਰਾਇੋਰਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ। ਅੱਜ ਜਦੋਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਡੋਰ ਸਟੈਪਸ 'ਤੇ ਤਾਂ ਲੋਕ ਕਈ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਬੜੀ, ਸੋ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਮੱਦੇਨਜ਼ਰ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਔਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੋਮਸਾਈਡ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਰਟੀਕੂਲਰਲੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਪਾਰਟਨਰਸ ਇਨਵੋਲਵਡ ਹੈਗੇ, ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮੌਤਾਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਨੇ, ਮਾਰਿਆ ਗਿਆ, ਕਤਲ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ। ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨ ਬਾਏ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ, ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਸੈੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ। ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੈਨ ਆ, ਟੋਟਲ ਬੈਨ ਲੱਗਿਆ। ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਮਨ ਪਸੰਦ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ
ਕਿ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਬਰਕਰਾਰ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਖੁਸ਼ਖਬਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ।
ਸੋ ਇਹ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਰਾਈਟ ਵੇ ਇਫੈਕਟਿਵ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ 'ਚ ਪਾਸ ਹੋਣੇ?
ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਨਿਸਟੀਰੀਅਲ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਇਹ ਆਰਡਰਸ ਆ, ਉਹ ਆਰਡਰਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਰਾਈਟ ਵੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਇਹ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਟਫਨ ਸੈਂਟੈਂਸਿਸ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਲੀਗਲ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਥਰੂ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਜਾਊਗਾ।
ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਫਾਈਨਲ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ?
ਫਾਈਨਲ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਇਹੀ ਆ, ਮੈਂ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਔਰ ਮਾਰਕੋ ਮੈਂਡੀਚੀਨੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਪਿਕ ਕੀਤਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਸਰੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਿਲ ਦੇ ਨੇੜੇ ਹੈਗਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇਹੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਟੌਪ ਪ੍ਰਾਇਓਰਟੀ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਲਏ ਜਾਣ। ਅਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਨਾਊਂਸਮੈਂਟ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਮੈਂ ਸੋਚਦਾ ਕਿ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਐਡਵੋਕੇਸੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹਦੀ ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਫਲ ਹੈ।
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਧਾਲੀਵਾਲ।
ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ।
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਸਰਾਏ। ਅੱਜ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਰਾਈਡਿੰਗ 'ਚ ਆ ਕੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨਸ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੈਨ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਨਾਊਂਸਮੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੀ ਕਮੈਂਟਸ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈ। ਹੁਣ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਦੀ ਬੜੀ ਡਿਮਾਂਡ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਗਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਘਟਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ ਲੱਗ ਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨਸ ਹੈ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਵਧਣਗੀਆਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਦੇ ਕੰਟਰੀ 'ਚ, ਕਿ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਇੰਪੋਰਟ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ, ਨਾ ਵੇਚ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ, ਨਾ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ, ਨਾ ਚਲਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਐਕਸੈਪਟ ਫॉर ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਸਰਕਮਸਟੈਂਸਿਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਸ਼ੂਟਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੰਪੈਰੀਟਿਵਲੀ ਓਲੰਪਿਕਸ ਜਾਂ ਪੈਰਾਲੰਪਿਕਸ 'ਤੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਦੇਖੋ ਇਹ ਇਕੱਲਾ ਗੈਂਗ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਲਈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੈਂਗ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਦੇਖੀਦਾ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਸੂਤਰਾਂ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਅਬਾਊਟ 50% ਲੀਗਲ ਗੰਨਾਂ ਓਨ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਚੋਰੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ ਜਾਂ ਸਟੋਲਨ ਜਾਂ ਸਟਰਾ ਪਰਚੇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਇਲੀਗਲ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ 'ਚ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ। ਇਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਘਟਾਅ ਹੋਊਗਾ, ਵਰਤੋਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਘਟਾਅ ਹੋਊਗਾ। ਫਿਰ ਦੂਸਰਾ ਪਾਰਟ ਹੈ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਡੋਮੈਸਟਿਕ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ, ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਮਾਵਾਂ ਔਰਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤਸ਼ੱਦਦ ਹੁੰਦਾ 1 out of 3 ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡੋਮੈਸਟਿਕ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਦੇ ਡੈਥ ਆ ਉਹ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ। ਥਰਡ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਣਾ ਫੈਮਲੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਮਾਨਸਿਕ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਰਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਡਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਖੁਦਕੁਸ਼ੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦਾ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਘਰ 'ਚ ਗਨ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਹਾਈਅਰ ਚਾਂਸ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਗਨ ਨੂੰ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕਰੂਗਾ। ਸੋ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਔਰ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਹਾਈ ਪਰਸੈਂਟੇਜ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨ ਨੂੰ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ। ਐਂਡ ਫੋਰਥ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡੋਮੈਸਟਿਕ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਇਨ ਜਨਰਲ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨਸ ਜਾਂ ਗਨਸ ਜ਼ਿਆਦੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਵੂਮਨ ਬਹੁਤ ਫੀਅਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ, ਉਹ ਡਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ। ਸੋ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰ ਮੈਜਰਸ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਇਹ ਔਨ ਇਟਸ ਓਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ। ਇਹ ਨਾ ਸੋਚੋ ਵੀ ਇਕੱਲਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੀਗਲ ਗਨ ਓਨਰਸ ਜਾਂ ਲੀਗਲ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਲੀਗਲਸ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਡਬਲ ਲਾਸਟ ਈਅਰ ਫੜ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਬਾਰਡਰ 'ਤੇ ਫਰਮ ਦ ਈਅਰ ਬਿਫੋਰ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੇ CBSA ਆਫਿਸਰ ਹਾਇਰ ਕੀਤੇ, RCMP ਆਫਿਸਰ ਹਾਇਰ ਕੀਤੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਫੈਕਟਿਵ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨੇਚਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਐਕਸਰੇ ਮਸ਼ੀਨਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਾਈਆਂ ਕੰਟੇਨਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਲ ਮਿਲ ਰਿਹਾ। ਔਰ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਲੀਗਲ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਗਨਸ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ 'ਚੋਂ ਨਿਕਲੀਆਂ, ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਲੀਗਲ ਸਟਰਾ ਪਰਚੇਸ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਲਾਸਟ ਈਅਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਸੌਲਟ ਰਾਈਫਲ ਦਾ ਬੈਨ। ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੰਨਾਂ ਕੱਲੀਆਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਕੋ ਹੀ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਲਈ ਡਿਜ਼ਾਈਨ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਹਿਊਮਨ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਹੰਟਿੰਗ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਸ਼ਿਕਾਰ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੈਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਔਰ ਉਹਦੀ ਇੰਡੀਪੈਂਡੈਂਟ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਡਿਸਾਈਡ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਅਸੌਲਟ ਰਾਈਫਲ ਔਰ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵਲੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਬਾਕੀ ਪ੍ਰੀਵੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਇੰਟਰਵੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਸੇਫ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ 'ਤੇ ਆਏ, ਸਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਪੈਸੇ ਮਿਲੇ ਔਰ ਇਹ ਮਾਡਲ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਐਂਡ ਈਵਨ ਵਰਲਡ ਦਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇੰਟੀਗ੍ਰੇਟਿਡ ਇੰਟਰਵੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਐਂਡ ਪ੍ਰੀਵੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਬੜਾ 7.5 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦਾ। ਇਹ ਫਿਰ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਏਜੰਸੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਠੀਕ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਆ। ਐਂਡ ਇਹ ਮੈਜਰਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਬਚਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਔਰ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਔਰ ਗਨ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਚਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ।
ਯੂਰ ਫਾਈਨਲ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਰਾਏ?
ਮੇਰਾ ਫਾਈਨਲ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਚੰਗੇ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਦੇਖੋ। ਇਹ ਡਿਮਾਂਡ ਆ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਦੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੰਨਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ। ਆਪਣਾ ਸਾਊਥ ਨੇਬਰ ਹੀ ਦੇਖ ਲਈਏ US ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਗਨਸ ਆ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਲੀਗਲ ਗਨਸ ਆ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਵਰਗੀਆਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੌਤਾਂ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਟਾਈਪ ਆਫ ਇਨਵਾਇਰਮੈਂਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਸਕੂਲ ਸ਼ੂਟਿੰਗਸ ਵੀਕਲੀ ਬੇਸਿਸ 'ਤੇ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਰਨ, ਮਾਲ ਸ਼ੂਟਿੰਗਸ ਵੀਕਲੀ ਬੇਸਿਸ 'ਤੇ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਰਨ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੋਸਾਇਟੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੇਫ ਹੋਵੇ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਨਾ ਫਿਕਰ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਸਕੂਲੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ, ਜਦੋਂ ਸ਼ਾਪਿੰਗ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ। ਜੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਧੀ ਵਿਆਹੀ ਆ ਅਤੇ ਉਹ ਘਰ ਡਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਹੈਂਡ ਗਨ, ਉਸ ਕਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੇਫ ਇਨਵਾਇਰਮੈਂਟ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਔਰ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹਿੰਮਤ ਪੂਰੀ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਵਾਂਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਮੌਤਾਂ ਕਦੇ ਗਾਹ ਨਾ ਹੋਣ।
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ। ਅੱਜ ਸਰੀ ਸਿਵਿਕ ਪਲਾਜ਼ਾ ਹੋਟਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਹੋਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੇ ਅੱਜ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੈਂਡਗਨ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੈਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਐਕਚੁਅਲੀ ਇਫੈਕਟਿਵ ਟਮੋਰੋ ਇਟ ਵਿਲ ਬੀ ਬੈਨਡ ਅਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਂਡਗਨਸ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਘਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੈਂਡਗਨਸ ਹੈ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਡੋਮੈਸਟਿਕ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਸੋ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਤੇ ਵੀ ਫੜਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਸਮਗਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਿਆਂਦਾ ਆ ਅਤੇ ਇਸ ਮੌਕੇ 'ਤੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਆਫ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਸੁਖ ਧਾਲੀਵਾਲ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਆਫ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਪਰਮਬੇਨਸ ਐਂਡ ਰਣਦੀਪ ਸਰਾਏ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਮਾਰਕ ਮੈਟਚੀਨੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਐਂਡ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਂਡਗਨਸ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਸੌਲਟ ਰਾਈਫਲਸ ਨੂੰ ਬੈਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੈਂਡਗਨਸ ਹੈ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਹੁਣ ਹੈਂਡਗਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਬੈਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਸੇਫ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਜਾਵੇ CJ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਿੰਗ ਫਰਮ ਸਿਵਿਕ ਪਲਾਜ਼ਾ ਹੋਟਲ ਇਨ ਸਰੀ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ